Howdy there, welcome to my tiny corner of the internet, where I talk about oddball things and what I feel like talking about. So, I haven't decided what I'm going to make the title or thumbnail of this video yet, is because I haven't really yet decided how I'm going to advertise it, but the topic of today's video is about cryptocurrency, and I kind of want to talk about the logic of it. You probably heard no shortage of dipshit bullshit arguments against cryptocurrency, like it has no value, and all that sorts of stuff. I don't want to criticize it based on these midwit arguments about cryptocurrency. I actually kind of want to make a new kind of criticism about cryptocurrency and say the reason why I don't ever see it succeeding is because it has become essentially the exact opposite of what it was originally designed to be. So let's wind the clock back. What is the craze of cryptocurrency and a decentralized monetary system? Well, a decentralized monetary system defines itself in opposition to a centralized monetary system where a central authority controls the money supply and can determine how to print money in and out of existence, such as the Federal Reserve and the US dollar. Now, when 2008 happened and you had an economic collapse, you had a complete crash of the economy, what happened is that 3 million some odd Americans lost their homes because they couldn't actually make payments on their home loans, and so they defaulted, they got foreclosed upon, and their houses got repossessed. That was not the case for the larger institutional investors and lenders, which the Federal Reserve later bailed out. And so the Federal Reserve gained the nickname the lender of last resort, where they would bail out firms that were allegedly too big to fail. And too big to fail meant that they were a critical part of the economy that shouldn't be allowed to fail. And so the Federal Reserve has the ability to print money into existence, to lend it into existence, to bail out firms that are too big to fail. And so this caused an outrage. It gave rise to Democratic Socialist of America and Bernie Sanders, who called this socialism for the rich, is because the rich were able to be bailed out, through these lending practices by the Federal Reserve, but everybody else had to endure rugged capitalism. Now, a less common criticism of the 2008 bubble and the 2008 crisis was the libertarian perspective as opposed to the socialist perspective, which argued for socialism in lieu of such an event with the 2008 crisis. So, what did libertarians propose as a solution to this? Now, believe it or not, libertarians back in the early 2010s did criticize the 2008 crisis and the bailout practices done by the Federal Reserve as inherently anti-free market capitalism, is because when you place selective favoritism between firms because you are the central authority of the monetary system, that is completely antithetical to the ideas of free market capitalism. And so there were no shortage of libertarians such as Ron Paul that opposed the way this crisis was handled. In fact, they believe that these institutions should be allowed to fail is because, according to free market capitalism, something that cannot actually stand on its own shouldn't be allowed to stand on its own, nor should it be incentivized or even bailed out to enable bad behavior with certain firms, because a lot of libertarians saw this as a drag on the economy. Now, I was obviously a part of that camp, is because back in the day when I was still a libertarian, I used to get very upset at this, is that this was inherently anti-free market capitalism, that they would play favorites with certain firms that they're going to bail out, everybody else got screwed. So, when it came to cryptocurrency, decentralized cryptocurrency seemed to be a solution to nullify the problem that is the Federal Reserve, where you have a central authority playing selective favorites with certain firms on what to bail out and what to not bail out. Now, there are pros and cons to having a decentralized currency where you have no central authority regulating the money supply. Now, the Federal Reserve, I want to give you a little bit of history on this sort of stuff, because we need to talk about monetary systems and the nature of money, and why cryptocurrency is probably doomed to fail, in my honest opinion, as an ex-libertarian. Now, the thing about it is, I've got to ask you a question, right? If you knew your money was going to be worth less than it is today, would you be encouraged to spend it or encouraged to save it? I bet you'd say you would be encouraged to spend it, is because if you knew your $100 in your wallet was going to be worth less tomorrow, you might as well spend it into something rather than just letting it lose value in your wallet. That is by design. The Federal Reserve targets an annual inflation rate of about 2%. Yes, I know we can talk about how awful inflation has been over the last 4 years, especially under the Biden administration, that has screwed over a ton of people, but there is a logic to why this inflation happens in the first place. So hear me out on why the Federal Reserve does this, and you can criticize the better aspects or even the worst aspects as you'd like in the comment section. I'm not defending the system, but I'm merely explaining to you the logic of it so you can understand why they do it. Now, if you're encouraged to spend your money, if you'll also look under the Biden administration, do you know who won out the most when it came to all that inflation? The people who owned and owned real tangible assets, real estate, company stocks. These things went up under the Biden administration, not the money in your wallet. And so that's kind of the interesting thing. When you have a depreciating currency, when your currency is continuously inflating and losing value, the assets in proportion to this money, gain value. They go up in value. Real estate is now $500,000 for a single family home. The average single family home is, as of Q1 2025, is $500,000. People were saying under the Biden administration there was an economic boom. Now, obviously, just because the numbers are going up, that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's lives or most people's lives are going good either. That's just no different than the 1920s. But that being said, the asset class won tremendously over 2020 to 2024. And so, by design, with inflation, the Federal Reserve, because, the dollar is losing value, you're encouraged to invest your money into assets that will hold value. So you have to give credit to the logic of the American state and the Federal Reserve to encourage people to invest their money into capital to actually make wealth. That being said, there's another thing that they want you to just in general spend your money, okay? If you're just buying consumer goods, you're going to the shop, you're buying stuff and just kind of enjoying and living life, right? You spending your money also stimulates the economy. Because, when they target that inflation rate of about 2%, where your money does lose its value, they actually encourage you to spend your money rather than to keep it. Now, you can either save your money by buying assets and owning capital, or you can spend it on consumer goods that are going to eventually lose value in the first place, and you can just kind of live your life lavishly if you really want to do that. I don't really care how you spend your money. I'm just kind of explaining the logic of the Federal Reserve and how it works and what its intended goal is. That being said, we all know inflation has kicked everybody's asses, and this is where a lot of the critics of the Federal Reserve come in, is because it's incredibly unfair that a central authority can literally deflate the value of your currency and essentially make you poor. Now here, again, I said in the last video that if the prices of goods and your income goes up in price and nominally at the same rate, right? If incomes and prices go up at the same rate, thus inflation, you don't really win or lose anything out in inflation that way when that does happen. What you do lose out is when prices grow faster than your income, and that differential makes your cost of living more expensive, right? And so we all know how inflation can be used to basically be an effective form of a hidden pay cut. You can see inflation as a tool to basically cause hidden pay cuts. If they really want to pay cut somebody, companies don't need to just necessarily cut your pay outright. All they've got to do is just not give you a pay raise in proportion to inflation. And so if incomes never catch up to the actual inflated prices, then you're actually getting poorer. Now, that's where plenty of critics of the Federal Reserve will say, well, this is incredibly unfair. But believe it or not, the Federal Reserve is not out to get you. It's out to make the economy run, because if it doesn't run, things don't get delivered, services don't get delivered. So there's a pragmatic utility on the Federal Reserve having to satisfy basic necessities to actually survive. It's not just this evil entity. It's something that actually does have a functional utility within the American state that needs to be understood. And so that being said, when it comes to it, this is why also a lot of people have flocked to the idea of cryptocurrency, a decentralized ledger and currency system where there is no central authority to enact what people would consider money manipulation. Now, here's the thing. As much as I hate the Federal Reserve, and you should too, because they caused all this inflation to make us infinitely poorer, right? Now let's also talk about why cryptocurrency is also doomed to fail. And this is not me just trying to take a bias shot at libertarians, right? There are plenty of stupid-ass arguments against cryptocurrency, but I would say this is the strongest argument against cryptocurrency on why I think it's just never going to work, all right? And so it goes down to this, and it has nothing to do with some government conspiracy to shut it down in the first place, all right? And so cryptocurrency has essentially, in practice, become the exact opposite of what it was intended to be. Cryptocurrency is essentially, it was intended to be an alternative currency that you used as a monetary system to buy common goods. It's supposed to be a substitute for the dollar. But the thing is, Bitcoin just reached a value of 100K. Now imagine 6 months ago that your Bitcoin, you had a single Bitcoin that was worth 50K, right? If you knew your Bitcoin was going to be worth 100K 6 months down the line, would you be more likely or less likely to spend it? Because it's appreciating in value, you'd be less likely to spend it because now you see it more as an asset rather than a currency. You expect it to appreciate year after year, much like you would like any other asset, like a stock in, Google, or a fancy car, or maybe a real estate property, right? And so your incentive isn't to spend it like a functional currency. You're actually just going to sit on it and do nothing with it, which defeats the entire purpose of a cryptocurrency. You invested in a cryptocurrency is because you wanted to see it be used as an alternative currency. But you're not even using it as a currency. You're sitting on it like an investment. Now, if it was actually something that was like a currency, it would have to target an annual inflation rate of some odd percentage where it would lose value over time. And so thus, you would be encouraged to spend it, and therefore it could be used as a currency within the economy. And just to make a little counter argument to any of the midwit dipshits who are probably going to come into my comment section saying, cryptocurrency has no value. I tell you what, okay, if I give you $2 million with a suitcase full of Benjamin, paper bills, and I drop you on an island in the middle of nowhere, right? Where are you going to spend that money? That's right, absolutely nowhere. The only things you can use that paper money for, even if you have $2 million in a briefcase of Benjamins, right, is either to start a fire or wipe your ass. So let's be real. Money doesn't have inherent value. It has relative value in what it can be exchanged for. So don't come into my comment section like a dipshit midwit saying cryptocurrency has no value. Don't waste my time with such a stupid take. That being said, if cryptocurrency can't even fulfill a similar role as the United States dollar, why even adopt it in the first place, right? And so this is the conundrum. If, cryptocurrency is going to maintain the same role as the United States dollar and be a substitute for a currency rate, it can't deflate. It can't act like an asset where it's continuously appreciating value. Otherwise, it can't functionally be money. But if it's always losing value, then who's going to want to throw their money into something that's always losing value? Now, that's the catch-22 about the dollar, but there's a reason why it's able to get away with that, and cryptocurrency isn't. And so because of that catch-22, I don't really see cryptocurrency going very far. Because as soon as cryptocurrency starts losing in money, in value, people are going to sell it off like anybody would with any ordinary asset, and it's never going to get mass adoption. And on top of that, it's like even if it were to get mass adoption, people would just continuously sit on it, expecting it to appreciate in value. And it's no different than in a depression where cash is king, is because, believe it or not, deflation actually occurs in a depression. Prices go down and the value of the dollar goes up. And so people are less likely to spend it if your money's going to go up, and therefore, worsening an economic depression is because if you're not spending it, companies aren't actually turning a profit. They can't employ people, and it actually goes it counteracts like any kind of stimulus to the economy. And so, this is the nature of a cryptocurrency and why I don't think it's ever going to succeed. As much as, my ex-libertarian self would love to believe that a decentralized currency is possible, cryptocurrency just isn't it. If it's too much like an asset, it's not going to actually be used like a currency, and that defeats the whole purpose of having a cryptocurrency in the first place. Oh, well, that's my 2 cents on why I don't think cryptocurrency is going to work. If you want to drop a comment and throw your own 2 cents, that's my 2 cents on why I think cryptocurrency is going to fail, because it, essentially, you have this conundrum of why people won't buy in the first place if it acts like an actual currency, and then when people do buy in, people treat it as like an asset, the exact opposite of a currency. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and close off the video. Let me know what you think. That's my 2 cents. Show me your 2 cents. Like, share, and subscribe. Have a good day.